The rain had no rhythm, just chaos on the windshield. I squinted through the downpour, my fingers clenched tight around the wheel of a pickup that wasn't mine. The highway signs had long disappeared behind sheets of gray. I didn't need them. I knew every turn of the road to Monroe by memory, and every turn led to something I had tried for years to forget. They didn't tell me about the funeral, not my sister's, not my mother. I found out from a second cousin who posted a blurry photo of the church on Facebook, captioned, "The end of an era. Rest easy, Mr. Torres." That was 2 days ago. I hadn't planned to go back, not to Monroe, not to that house, but some roads aren't chosen. Some roads pull you in, like floodwater swallowing the ground beneath you. The closer I got, the worse the flooding became. Creeks had turned into rivers, and streets into warnings. I had to detour 3 times, once through a stranger's backyard, just to get within 5 miles of the house. The sky was angry, and so was I. I'd borrowed the truck from a friend in Baton Rouge. He said, "You sure about this?" I wasn't, but I'd learned long ago, when family hides something, it's never small, and silence has a way of drowning louder than any storm. As I approached the final road to the house, water brushed against the tires. The truck grumbled but didn't stop. Neither did I. I remembered my father's voice, worn, soft, the way it was in the final months. "Don't let them bury you, baby, not without knowing where you stand." I made it to the driveway, barely. The house stood on a slight incline, the only reason it wasn't underwater. But I couldn't say the same for everything around it. I stepped out into shin-deep, murky water, my boots vanishing beneath the surface with every step. The porch light was on. I knocked once, then twice. Nothing. Third time, heavy, firm. The door creaked open an inch. "You shouldn't be here." Alethea's voice was exactly as I remembered, cool, controlled, like a line rehearsed. I wiped rain from my eyes. "He was my father too." She didn't respond. Just stared for a moment before shutting the door again, this time with finality. It wasn't the first time she closed a door on me, but it was the first time it felt like something had shifted inside me. I stood there for a long moment, soaked, my breath fogging up the night air. I stepped back, circled around the side of the house, boots sloshing through the shallow flood, and found the side entrance, unlocked, like always. My father used to leave it that way for me when I'd drive in from the city to help with his treatments. He called it my welcome back route. Inside, the house smelled of lemon polish and wilted lilies. Neat, too neat, the kind of clean that masks something underneath. I took a few steps in, the wood floors creaking softly. Everything was just as I remembered, except for one thing. No photos of me. The family wall in the hallway used to hold snapshots of birthdays, school events, messy holiday dinners. Now, it was curated, framed perfection. My sisters in tailored dresses, my mother smiling under a wide-brimmed hat, my father, in one photo, holding a fishing rod with Alethea beside him. But not one photo with me in it. Calliope's voice floated from the kitchen. "Well, look who survived the storm." I turned. She was holding a glass of wine, leaning casually against the counter. "I wasn't the only one underwater, apparently," I replied. She smirked. "Mother's in the living room. Be respectful." "Respect is earned," I said, brushing water from my sleeve. She tilted her head. "And timing is everything." They always did this. Delivered subtle blows wrapped in polite tones. The kind of cruelty you couldn't call out without looking dramatic. In the living room, guests I barely knew circled an urn. My mother sat on the edge of the sofa, hands folded tightly, wearing a gray dress too stiff for mourning. I stood by the doorway. No one acknowledged me. Memories came uninvited, sitting in this very room feeding my father spoonfuls of broth when he couldn't lift a fork, helping him to the bathroom when his legs gave up. I was the one who held his hand during the long, silent hours between chemo appointments. My sisters sent money, made occasional phone calls, posted filtered "thinking of you, Dad" selfies. But I stayed. And still, I wasn't invited to his funeral. Still, they locked the door when I knocked. They called me when they needed someone to stay the night, I thought, but not when they planned to bury him. Alethea walked in, looking like she'd just stepped off a campaign stage. She glanced at me, her expression unreadable. Then she turned to my mother and said, "We're ready." I moved closer, just enough to see the family gathering in a circle around the urn. Calliope turned to me. "This is a private family moment." I blinked. "You think I don't belong?" She didn't answer. No one did. My mother looked at me, her face as tight as her posture. She didn't nod, didn't reach, just looked away. I backed out of the room, step by step, until I was on the porch again. Rain still falling, my jacket clung to my skin like punishment. Inside, through the glass, I saw them, huddled together, smiling faintly, mourning their version of the man who raised us. Funny thing about floods, it's not the water that drowns you, it's the silence that comes after. The house was warm, but it never felt colder. They let me in after someone, probably Dahlia, quietly unlatched the door from inside. No one said, "Come on in," or asked if I needed to dry off. No one handed me a towel. So I stood there, dripping on their hardwood floors, water collecting at my heels like some uninvited storm they hoped would pass on its own. Alethea didn't even look at me as she walked by. Calliope gave me that smile, the one she wore at charity events, the one that said, "You're here because we let you be, not because you belong." I nodded stiffly and stepped into the hallway. It hit me before I reached the living room. The wall. The family photo wall. It used to be a cluttered timeline of our lives, candids from birthdays, vacations, awkward school portraits taped in cheap frames. But now it was polished, pruned, perfect, and absent of me. Not one frame held my face. Not the Christmas where I dressed up as Santa because Dad threw his back out. Not the summer where I drove 5 hours to surprise Mom for her birthday. Gone, like someone went through each photo with scissors and certainty. If they could erase me from the pictures, what else had they erased? Dinner that night was served buffet style, as if formality might cover tension. The table was long, but my seat was at the farthest end, next to the patio door. I sat quietly, watching as Alethea clinked her wine glass with her spoon. "To Dad," she said, smiling. "To the real ones, the children who stuck around." The air turned solid. A few cousins shifted in their chairs. My fork hovered mid-air. I set it down. "I was there when it mattered," I said, eyes on her. Alethea didn't miss a beat. "Then why weren't you invited to the will reading?" Laughter. Just a single cough from someone, but it was enough to thicken the silence. My throat tightened, but I kept my voice calm. "Maybe because y'all weren't ready for the truth." "You're not owed anything," Calliope added gently, "especially when you're always keeping your distance." I smiled thinly. Distance is what happens when you're left out of the map. Later, in the den, Calliope dimmed the lights and turned on the TV. "Let's play something special," she said, and a slideshow began. Images from decades past flickered across the screen. Birthdays, barbecues, graduation caps. I leaned forward, waiting for a glimpse of recognition, of proof I wasn't imagining everything. But photo after photo, nothing. They were all there. Mom, Dad, my sisters, distant relatives, even the neighbor's dog. But not me. Not even in the background. Like I had never existed. Dahlia tugged my sleeve. "Where are you in these pictures, Auntie?" I stared at the screen, swallowing back the sting. "I guess I was always behind the camera." Calliope, without looking away, replied, "Well, someone had to be." The room chuckled politely. My niece squeezed my hand. After the slideshow, I drifted to the kitchen, pretending to refill my glass. Mom was there, rinsing a dish at the sink. Her movements were slow, methodical, like she had memorized every step of pretending not to notice me. "I saw the photos," I said. She didn't look up. "They chose the most flattering ones." "I was part of this family, Mom. Still am." She dried her hands. "You've always been different, Alazne. More intense. Your sisters are easier. They don't make things complicated." I wanted to scream. Instead, I just asked, "Do you ever wonder why I left?" She finally looked at me, her eyes tired. "We all made sacrifices." "When you've been hurt enough times," I whispered, "you stop expecting rescue." Later, long after most of the guests had left and the house had settled into that eerie post-funeral quiet, I wandered into what used to be my bedroom. The smell of old books and cedar hit me first. The room was now a half-storage, half-guest room, boxes stacked where my bed once was, a folded cot leaning against the wall. I sat on the floor and opened a box labeled Miss Papers. Among unpaid bills and grocery lists, one envelope caught my eye. Cream-colored. My father's handwriting scrawled across it in all caps. For her. My fingers trembled. I didn't open it, not yet. I didn't need to read it to know it was mine. But I also knew. The truth inside might finally break me. I sat on the edge of what used to be my bed, though now it resembled more of a storage platform than a place someone could sleep. There were boxes beneath it labeled in uneven handwriting, linens, Dad's books, misc. My knees pressed together, the envelope resting in my lap like a dare. I traced my thumb along the flap. The seal was brittle, but intact. My name wasn't written anywhere on it, but I knew it was meant for me. His handwriting, strong, slanted, unapologetically all caps, covered the front. I didn't know what was inside yet, but I knew whatever it was going to change something, or confirm what I already feared. The last night I saw him, a storm just like this one rattled the windows. I'd tucked a blanket around his legs, careful not to bump the IV line. He had reached out, fingers trembling, and whispered, "There's things I should have told you, things they never let me say." I asked what he meant, but his eyelids had already started to droop, the weight of morphine pressing him under. Now I was holding what he couldn't say out loud. I opened it. The letter was dated 3 years ago. The ink had faded slightly, and the paper was creased like he had folded and unfolded it a dozen times, never deciding if it should be sent or hidden. "Alazne," it started. "I should have fought harder for you. I watched you give up college so your sister could study abroad. I saw the light in you go quiet, and I let it happen. They told me it was the right thing to do, that we all make sacrifices, but only you made one, and I let you." I had to stop reading. My eyes blurred, and not just from exhaustion. I remembered that day, sitting at the kitchen table, acceptance letter in one hand, financial aid application in the other. Mom had looked over her glasses and said, "We don't have the money for both. Calliope's offer is now. Yours can wait." I'd smiled and said, "It's okay." Then I went to my room and cried into a pillow. He knew, and he did nothing. When they said, "Family means compromise," they meant you should always be the one to bend, the letter continued. You were brighter than both of them combined, and I let them dim you. It was the apology I'd waited my whole adult life for, and it arrived in silence, postmarked from the grave. I kept reading. He talked about Mom next, about how she'd never acknowledged the money I sent. "I know you covered her medical bills," he wrote. "You did more for her than they ever did combined, but she won't say it. That's not how she shows gratitude. She'll thank God before she thanks you." And he was right. I remembered calling her one winter, asking if she got the $600 I transferred to help cover her prescriptions. She said, "Oh yes, one of the girls must have sent it. I thought it was Calliope." I said nothing, just swallowed that familiar bitterness and replied, "Glad it helped." So she knew, but she pretended it wasn't me. I folded the letter back slowly, each crease aligning perfectly with the original folds. It fit right back into the envelope like it had never been opened. I stood, unsure of what to do with the weight that letter had dropped into my chest. I moved through the house like a ghost, my footsteps lighter than they should have been, as if the walls might recognize me and snap if I wasn't careful. The floorboards moaned beneath my weight. The living room looked untouched, like a shrine to a family I didn't recognize. In the corner sat a shelf of old books. My eyes landed on the worn spine of Where the Sidewalk Ends. He used to read it to me when I couldn't sleep. I pulled it down, flipped to a random page, and whispered, "There is a place where the sidewalk ends." I paused. This wasn't that place, not anymore. I placed the book back carefully and headed toward my old desk, tucked between stacks of broken lamps and mismatched chairs. I reached for the bottom drawer, tugged once. It stuck. Tugged again. It popped open with a groan. Inside was a dusty cassette recorder. The kind you had to push 2 buttons to play. I hesitated, then pressed play. The batteries still had life. At first, just static. Then, his voice. If they ever read this. He coughed, then continued. Know that she's mine. Alazne is my daughter. I froze. The words didn't echo. They landed. I rewound the tape. Played it again. Alazne is my daughter. There was more. Chopped audio, fragments, his breathing. But that part was clear. I sat back slowly, the device resting in my hand like something sacred and fragile all at once. That night, it wasn't the flood outside that broke me. It was the voice I hadn't heard in years, finally telling the truth. The next morning, I stood in the kitchen with a chipped mug in my hands, listening to the silence crack between the floorboards. The coffee was too strong, too bitter, maybe because it was brewed by a house where warmth was no longer welcome. The rain had finally stopped outside, but everything still felt soaked through. Dahlia came in quietly, her hair unbrushed, carrying a folded paper clutched in both hands like it might fly away if she didn't hold tight. She placed it on the counter in front of me. Mom said you might need this, she mumbled before disappearing down the hall. I unfolded it. It was a hospital bill. My name listed as the patient, paid in full. But the signature at the bottom, bold, sweeping, rehearsed, read, Calliope Torres. I stared at it, trying not to laugh out loud. This wasn't just petty. It was systematic. It's not the lies that sting. It's the confidence they have that no one will question them. I stood in the hallway a moment later, clutching that paper like it was a receipt for betrayal, before walking into the small den where Aurelia sat folding laundry like nothing in this world had ever been inconvenient for her. You have a minute? I asked, calm. She didn't look up. Of course. I sat across from her and set the bill on the table. Why would Calliope sign my name to this? She folded a towel. She probably thought it was easier. For who? Still no eye contact. What's this about? I reached into my pocket and pulled out the letter Dad had written. I didn't hand it to her, just looked her in the eye. Did you know what he wrote? She paused, then resumed folding. Your father had a lot of regrets near the end. Did you ever regret how you treated me? That got her attention. She exhaled, shaking her head. I was young. He was married. You were born into a mistake, and I've tried to make peace with that. My throat tightened. So I was a mistake? I asked. You were never supposed to stay. I stood slowly. I did stay. I stayed longer than anyone, and all I ever got in return was silence. She didn't reply. I left her there with her folded laundry and her rehearsed detachment. Later that afternoon, Alethea called a family check-in, which meant everyone sat around the living room pretending we were a unit, while she played CEO of someone else's legacy. We need to talk about Dad's ashes, she said, her tone more executive than emotional. Where are they? I asked. She waved a hand. They're being held until we decide on a more appropriate memorial. I thought we were his memorial. Sentiment is fine, Alazne, she said, voice cold. But this is about legacy. After the conversation fizzled into thinly veiled jabs about estate costs and public image, I slipped away and checked the laundry room. Tucked behind the utility sink, under a stack of disused towels, was the urn, covered in dust. Sitting next to a half-empty bag of dog food and a bottle of expired bleach, even in death, they couldn't give him a seat at the table. That night, the 3 of us sat again at the long dining table. Alethea poured herself wine. Calliope opened a manila envelope and slid it to me across the polished wood. It read, Estate Clarification. I flipped through, Legalese, Conditions. One line caught my eye. In order to proceed with claim consideration, Alazne Torres must submit DNA confirmation of relation to the deceased. Alethea looked smug. Calliope placed a hand gently over mine. It's just formality. You understand? Legal clarity. I looked up at both of them. I have nothing to prove, I said. But you do. They blinked. You're asking for a test you think I won't take, but what you're really terrified of is that I might. Alethea leaned back, arms folded. It's protocol. No, it's control. And funny enough, the ones who scream for proof are usually the ones hiding the most. Their silence was enough confirmation for me. Back in the guest room, I closed the door and leaned against it, letting the silence settle around me like armor. I took out my father's old phone, something I'd almost forgotten about in the chaos. The kind you flip open with a loud click, battery thick and barely holding charge. He'd kept his voice memos on it because he said writing made his hands hurt. I scrolled through the files. There it was, labeled simply, "For her." I didn't hit play. Instead, I reached into my bag, pulled out the worn business card he'd tucked inside a notebook months before he passed. Ivana Torres, Estate Law, Baton Rouge. I stared at the card, then whispered, "Let's see if truth still has a lawyer in this town." They wanted proof. I'm bringing the kind they can't cross out of a photo. I sat at the edge of the guest bed, the carpet still damp near the window from the night before. The envelope from Dad's drawer lay beside me, but it wasn't what I picked up next. I held the business card in my hand like a lifeline, worn at the edges, slightly smudged from years buried in forgotten paper piles. Ivana Torres, Estate Law, Baton Rouge. I dialed. The phone rang twice. A low voice answered, direct and unfazed. "Torres." I cleared my throat. "This is Alazne, my father. He gave me your card before he passed. I think it's time we talked." She was silent for a second, then said, "Come by tomorrow morning, discreetly, 9 a.m. Dad once told me, some lawyers keep you out of trouble. She's the one you call when you're already drowning." Turns out, I'd been underwater longer than I realized. That night, I couldn't sleep. Something kept nudging me toward the dresser across the room. I opened the bottom drawer. Buried under old linens and a broken curtain rod was a manila folder with a name sticker that had long since faded. I opened it. There they were. Documents I'd signed a year ago when Calliope told me Mom's insurance needed updating. Emergency paperwork, she called it. Just routine. I was exhausted that week, managing work and Dad's appointments. I didn't read them. I trusted her. Now, I saw what they really were. Property reassignment, my name, my signature, and a line that stripped me of any future claim to the house. I stood up, folder in hand, and walked straight to the living room, where Calliope was scrolling her phone on the couch, feet up like she was on a spa retreat. "You lied to me." She didn't look up. "You're going to have to be more specific. These papers, you said they were medical." "I said they were urgent. You knew I wouldn't read them." She finally met my eyes. "You signed. That's what matters in court." There was no shame, no guilt. Just cold certainty. I thought about every time I'd said yes to family, thinking it meant something deeper. Turns out, family is just the word they use to keep me from reading the fine print. The next morning, I woke up to Dahlia shaking my shoulder. "Did you see this?" she asked, handing me her tablet. A headline blared across the screen. "Family overcomes flood tragedy. Sisters save the day." There was a photo underneath, Alethea standing in knee-deep water, arms around Dahlia. She was wearing the rescue jacket I'd given her when I went back for Dahlia. The article credited quick-thinking aunts for saving a child from rising floodwaters. My name wasn't mentioned. I scrolled down to the comments. "True heroes," someone wrote. "Powerful women." Another chimed in. "Alethea's always been so selfless." In their version of the flood, I wasn't even there. That evening at dinner, I brought the printed article with me. Set it right in the center of the table. "You wore my jacket," I said to Alethea. "You watched me carry your daughter through 6 feet of water while you screamed on the porch." She kept eating, didn't blink. "I did what I had to do," she said flatly. Aurelia, without lifting her gaze from her glass, murmured, "She was under a lot of pressure." I turned to Dahlia. The girl looked up from her plate and said softly, "But you were the one who carried me." That silence wasn't awkward. It was indictment. Calliope broke it, tapping her nails on the wineglass stem. "We've already submitted the estate papers to the board, by the way. Even without your signature, they said Dad's intent was clear." I smiled, slow and steady. "Funny. I found a letter that says otherwise." Her face drained. For the first time, I thought, I saw fear in her. Not of me, but of what I might still have. The sun wasn't up yet, but I hadn't really slept anyway. The house was too quiet, the kind of silence that grows sharp edges. I slipped into the guest room and shut the door softly behind me, laying the manila folder flat on the bed. The documents inside were wrinkled, but the damage was crisp, clean, and legal. Property reassignment, estate exclusions, my own signature, betraying me in ink. I made photocopies of everything, front and back, dated, notarized where possible. Then I slid the originals back into the folder and tucked the copies into my tote, right behind my father's letter and the hospital bills they'd doctored. By 8:30 a.m., I was parked outside a modest cafe on the edge of Monroe. The kind of place where retirees nursed black coffee all morning and locals pretended not to gossip. Ivana was already there, seated at a booth in the far back, wearing dark glasses and a navy jacket that made her look more like a federal agent than an estate attorney. She didn't smile when I sat down. "Show me." I handed over the folder. She flipped through the pages, eyes scanning fast but sharp. "This is not just unethical," she said, tapping a page. "This is forgery, especially with a legally disabled individual involved at the time these were signed." I nodded. "They counted on me being too exhausted to notice and too ashamed to fight." Her eyes lifted from the paper to meet mine. "They underestimated the wrong daughter." "This time," I said, "I won't just speak, I'll file." She gave a short nod. "We're going to build this carefully, fact by fact. Emotion doesn't win cases, documentation does." I reached into my wallet and pulled out a folded receipt from 2 years ago. "Does this count as fact?" I asked. It was the final payment I'd made toward the loan that saved the family house, a debt my mother said we'd all chip in for. But I was the only one who did. Ivana inspected the printout, then leaned back. "This mortgage was in your mother's name, but paid from your account." "And yet," I said, "not a single thank you. Just another box I was expected to check." She shook her head slowly. "You didn't just help, you saved them from foreclosure." "And in return," I said, "they erased me." She scribbled a note on her legal pad. "Tell me something else, Alazne. Has this happened before?" The question caught me off guard. I looked down at my hands. "There was a scholarship. Years ago, Calliope was applying for a conference in Florence, some high-profile academic thing. She needed a writing sample, and she was swamped. I helped her polish a paper, except I wrote the whole thing." Ivana raised a brow. "You have proof?" "I think so." That night, I went digging. After dinner, after the silence settled again, I snuck into the hall closet where they stored all the old tech and obsolete junk they couldn't bring themselves to toss. I found the thumb drive in a dusty pencil box labeled School Stuff. On it, a PDF file titled The Social Currency of Gender. Opened and read like my voice had been taken hostage, the footer listed the author as Calliope Torres, University of Georgia. "They didn't just silence my voice," I whispered. "They published it under someone else's." The next morning, Ivana and I met again, this time in her office. We mapped out a plan. Fraudulent misrepresentation, forged estate documents, historical financial manipulation, and identity plagiarism. One by one, she labeled them with sticky notes like evidence in a courtroom drama. "Let them keep playing the public image game," she said. "We'll win with paper, not pity." I nodded. "Let them think I'm quiet. I'm just preparing my turn." Back at the house, I climbed the stairs to my old room, laptop in hand. I sat down, opened the audio recorder my father had left, and listened to the full version of the memo I hadn't had the strength to hear before. "If you're listening, it means they've already tried to bury you. But remember, you are the root, not the weed." I saved the file under a new name on my phone, Memo 1 Evidence. They planted a lie. I'm growing the truth. The morning light was soft and syrupy, seeping through the sheer curtains like nothing had ever been broken in this house. But outside, in the backyard, there was a stage being set, White chairs arranged in rows, floral arrangements placed just so, and a podium placed beneath the live oak Dad used to trim himself. Alethea was already out there, directing the photographer like she was choreographing grief. Her hair curled perfectly, her pearl earrings catching the sun. A black dress that clung to her in all the right places. Beside her, Calliope adjusted the urn on a pedestal wrapped in burlap and ribbon. Memorial tribute, they called it. Celebration of legacy, according to the press release. I stood in the kitchen doorway, watching the photographer scan the scene and pause when his lens caught me inside. Alethea didn't miss a beat. "She's not part of the shoot," she said. "We want this to feel unified." Calliope drifted closer, leaned in with that syrupy tone she reserved for backhanded jabs. "It's a family-only piece. You wouldn't want to be in something you weren't really a part of." I said nothing. Not because I was defeated, but because I knew now, silence is power when you've already started collecting receipts. It's not just that they excluded me, they built a reality where I never existed. Later that day, I scrolled through my phone in the hallway while the house buzzed with afterglow energy from their little performance. There it was, Alethea's post. Together, we weathered the storm, for Dad, for family. Photo, her, Calliope, the urn. My jacket still wrapped around Alethea's shoulders like a prop. Caption: "Thank you to those who stayed, those who showed up when it mattered most." I commented simply, "You forgot someone." It was deleted within minutes. Dahlia, sitting cross-legged on the floor nearby, looked up from her tablet. "I heard Mom on the phone," she said, matter of fact. "She told someone to blur the face in the flood video, said, 'We don't need distractions.'" I didn't ask who the face was. I already knew. The next text came that afternoon. Ivana sent a photo of a conference brochure from 10 years ago. Look what I found. It was Calliope's keynote. The title was familiar, because I wrote it. Back then, I was 17, still living at home, balancing tutoring and caring for Dad. She was flying to Florence to speak on intersectional gender narratives. The night before her flight, I sat at the kitchen table finishing the draft while she tried on outfits and talked about gelato. She never thanked me, never credited me, and when I confronted her then, she said, "It's just a draft. I'll revise it." Now, staring at that brochure, it was word for word my paper, my ideas, my voice. When I showed her the printout, her face didn't even twitch. "You were a kid," she said. "I polished it." That's how the world works. "No," I said. "The world doesn't work when one woman's voice is stolen and applauded under another's name. That's not how anything should work." She left the room. No apology. Just an exit, as if shame were beneath her. That evening, after dinner, Dahlia brought me something. A crumpled sheet of paper, drawn in marker, folded twice, and sealed with a sticker of a rainbow cat. She unfolded it gently. A family tree. Alazne. Centered. Circled in purple. "I didn't let them forget you," she said, her voice small but firm. I couldn't speak, just ran my hand over the paper, letting the texture hold me upright. Truth doesn't need to be loud. Sometimes, it just needs to be drawn with love. At 9:37 p.m., a knock came at the door. A man in a charcoal suit handed me a sealed envelope and left without a word. Inside, a single sheet. At the top, waiver of claim, estate of Adam Torres, and a post-it stuck above the signature line. "We figured you'd want to move on. One signature and it's all over." No name, no logo, no explanation. I folded the paper, folded the envelope. They wanted my silence packaged. What they don't know is, I've already started wrapping the truth. The text came at noon, short, cold, calculated. "Family dinner tonight. Might be your last chance to speak." No signature, but it didn't need one. Calliope's punctuation always gave her away. Precise periods, no emojis, no warmth. I read it twice, then slipped my phone back into my coat pocket and sat by the window for a long time, watching a blue jay hop between puddles on the porch. I hadn't been invited to anything else this week. Not the slideshow, not the lawyer meeting, not the photo shoot. But this dinner, they wanted me there. I showed up in black, not out of drama, but as a choice. I was mourning a family still breathing. The dining room looked like a set from one of those glossy magazines Mom used to keep in the bathroom. Candles in glass cylinders, polished cutlery, linen napkins folded into triangles. Everyone was already seated when I walked in. I chose the seat across from Alethea deliberately. Our eyes met just long enough for her jaw to tighten. Dad used to say, "You have to earn your place, even among kin." Back then, I thought he was talking about respect. Now I think he meant survival. They called it a dinner, but it felt more like an execution. We ate in silence for 20 minutes, forks scraping, water poured, occasional forced smiles when someone passed the rolls. Then Alethea stood, cleared her throat and said, "The estate has been finalized." She passed out envelopes like party favors. Inside each was a letter, formal, embossed, signed. Mine was blank. Calliope reached over and patted my wrist like I was a toddler being told they'd run out of cake. "It's legal now. That's closure." I didn't raise my voice. I just reached into my bag, pulled out a second envelope, and laid it flat on the table. "Funny," I said, "because here's Dad's original will, notarized, witnessed, still binding, including a clause that was never revoked." Calliope stopped chewing. Alethea didn't move. "You wrote me out," I said, "but he wrote me in." Alethea finally leaned forward, voice icy. "That won't hold." "Then let's test it, in court." No one said anything, so I kept going. I placed a printed photo beside the will. "This is my fingerprint, on the family safe, taken the day I opened it after arriving here. But when I got to the documents, they'd already been moved. Someone had been in there before me." Calliope stared at the tablecloth. Alethea reached for her wine, but I saw her hand tremble. Sometimes the truth isn't hidden. It's been handled too many times. And now, it showed. Then, from the far end of the table, Dahlia's voice rang out, quiet but steady. "You said Auntie didn't matter," she said to her mother. "But she's the only one who didn't yell when I cried." Every fork froze. Aurelia, sitting at the head like a monarch no one listened to anymore, cleared her throat. "Alazne, maybe you should—" I didn't let her finish. "I should have left years ago," I said. "But I stayed, not for this table, but for the one who built it." I rose, calm, steady, and laid one last sheet of paper on the table, a copy of the legal filing Ivana had submitted earlier that day. Her name printed across the header, her credentials clear, her reputation airtight. As I turned to walk out, I tapped the play button on my phone's speaker. Dad's voice filled the room. "Alazne is my daughter, and I'm proud of her." I didn't stop walking, just let it play behind me as I reached the door, jacket in hand. This time, I didn't slam the door. I didn't need to. The silence behind me did the job. The motel walls were thin. I could hear the shower running next door, the dull murmur of a TV someone left on overnight. But in my room, it was silent. Not the kind of silence that presses down, begging to be broken. No, this one felt earned, like I had finally wrestled it from something that used to control me. I sat on the edge of the bed, still wearing yesterday's clothes, staring at my phone on the nightstand. 10 missed calls, 3 voicemails, a few from numbers I didn't recognize, one from Mom. No message. I didn't return any of them. Not yet. I opened my voice memos, tapped the one labeled for her, and sent it directly to Ivana's secure server. "If you're hearing this," Dad's voice crackled through my speaker, "it means they tried to erase you. Don't let them." The words hit differently this time. I wasn't in the house anymore, wasn't facing them across a table pretending to be a family. I was alone in a motel outside Monroe, and for the first time in years, I felt solid in that solitude. I let the audio play again, this time from the beginning to the last faint breath on the recording. And then I cried. Not because I was broken, but because something inside me had finally settled. What was lost could be grieved now. What was hidden had been named. A memory surfaced. Dad trying to speak to me one night, years ago, in the garage. "If anything happens," he began. But Mom had called him in before he could finish. I'd assumed it was nothing. It took him dying to finally speak up, and it took me breaking to finally hear him. Mid-morning, after a shower and 2 cups of burnt lobby coffee, I opened the envelope I had carried around since Chapter 3 like it was some kind of cursed relic. I hadn't been ready before. But now I needed to know it all. The letter was dated 3 years ago. The ink smudged near the edges like it had been folded and reopened over and over. I saw what they were doing, it began. I knew what they'd become. I just didn't know how to stop them without losing you, too. He detailed a property title transfer Calliope had pushed for, one he never signed. He'd left the papers unsigned in the safe, assuming it would be enough to stall them, but they found ways around it. Legal, maybe. Ethical? Never. If this letter had reached me sooner, I said aloud, maybe I wouldn't have stayed loyal to ghosts. I folded the letter slowly, placed it back in the envelope, and tucked it beside the printout of the will and a copy of the fake waiver. The floodgates had opened elsewhere, too. News had started spreading, first in small pockets of local buzz, then louder as the audio leaked online. The headline on a local blog read, "Inheritance Battle Reveals Secret Recordings and Family Divide." Alethea lost a corporate sponsorship that afternoon. Her statement, "This is a private family matter." The internet disagreed. Calliope's university board issued a statement of their own. "We are reviewing recent concerns regarding academic authorship integrity." I didn't even have to send them the conference brochure. Ivana had taken care of that. One of my cousins from out west texted me, "Didn't know. Should have said something. Proud of you." I stared at that message for a while. Typed, "Thanks." Deleted it. Typed, "Too late." Deleted that too. I didn't reply. Some things don't need responses. I hadn't heard from Mom. No apology, no questions. But her silence wasn't a surprise. It was just the echo of a pattern I finally stopped mistaking for grief. By late afternoon, I was back at the little table near the window, sunlight creeping across the carpet, brushing against my shoes. I placed the letter, the audio transcript, the forged documents, and the notarized will into a single large envelope. On the front, I wrote 2 words in thick black ink, Exhibit A. Just then, my phone rang. Ivana. "We're moving forward," she said. "Full legal action. You ready?" I looked in the mirror across from me, saw a woman I hadn't recognized in years. Not beaten down, not afraid, just clear. "If they wanted silence," I said, "they should have picked someone who didn't know how to write." The envelope was thick, official. My name spelled correctly on the front, for once. Inside, a folded court notice with the words, "Estate Challenge Hearing, Monroe County Court, confirmed." I stared at it for a while, letting the weight of it settle into my chest. The last time I'd been in a courtroom was for a parking ticket I didn't bother contesting. This time, I was going for something that couldn't be towed or dismissed. I was walking in not to defend a mistake, but to reclaim a name. Ivana called that afternoon. Her voice was calm, but sharper than usual. "This case isn't just about the will," she said. "It's about the pattern of erasure. And we have proof." I stood by the motel window, watching people pass by like nothing in their world had been fractured. "Sometimes the justice system feels like walking into the lion's den," I told her. "But this time, I've got the lion's number." The prep sessions began 2 days later. Long, tedious, paper-heavy. Ivana dug deeper into the estate records and found a contract buried in county archives, a real estate agreement from nearly 20 years ago. Back when I was still technically a minor, Mom had put me on the deed to the house as a co-signer. The loan wouldn't go through otherwise. A few years later, I was gone, and so was my name from the document. Replaced. Forged. I sat across from Ivana, mouth dry. "I thought I was helping them build a home," I said quietly. "Turns out, I helped them build a wall to keep me out." She didn't answer right away, just underlined a clause on the paperwork and said, "That alone can invalidate their claim. It's provable intent." The next breakthrough came faster than I expected. Ivana contacted the notary listed on my father's original will. She was still practicing, still had the logbook. The will, signed and witnessed, had never been legally revoked. It called for equal distribution of all assets among his children and left me a specific gift: the land behind the house, the workshop, the place where Dad and I used to fix old radios, where I helped him build a bench from scrap wood when I was 12. When we presented the will during mediation, Calliope cracked first. "We didn't think she'd fight back," she muttered, loud enough for the room to hear. They built their lies on the assumption I wouldn't speak, I thought. That assumption just cost them everything. The fallout was swift. Calliope was placed on administrative leave from her university. An official inquiry into her academic integrity was launched. Students came forward with stories about ghostwriting, suspicious grading, the quiet kind of scandal that seeps in and ruins slowly. Alethea lost a sponsor she had worked for years to charm. Her Family First branding campaign collapsed under the weight of leaked recordings and court filings. No one wants to back a face on a billboard when that face is linked to fraud. I got a message from an old high school teacher. "I knew who really wrote that essay," she said. "Good for you, Alazne." In this country, reputation can be a weapon, but it cuts both ways. The day of the hearing, I wore navy slacks and a black blouse. No jewelry, no makeup. Just a pen in my pocket, my father's ring on a chain around my neck, and every document that proved I belonged. The courtroom was beige, windowless. Fluorescent lights. A judge who didn't smile once. But after the testimony, after the submission of evidence, the playback of the recording, and Ivana's final argument, he said the words I'd waited months, years, to hear. "The will shall proceed to probate as presented. All supplemental documents are to be recognized as valid. Ownership will be reassigned as outlined in the original agreement." I didn't cry. I didn't sigh with relief. I just stood, nodded to the judge, and walked out. No applause, no victory speeches, just me, and the air outside. I got into my car, the same borrowed one I'd driven through the flood, and stared at the empty passenger seat. He should have been here for this, but I heard him, even now, in the quiet. "Good job, kiddo." The front porch creaked under my boots, same as it had when I was a teenager sneaking in past curfew. But this time, I wasn't returning in shame. I was walking in to collect the last of what belonged to me, and maybe leave behind the weight of what never did. A neighbor watering her potted plants glanced up and gave me a small, solemn nod. "He'd be proud of you, you know," she said. I nodded back. I think he finally told me that. Inside, the house looked smaller, not physically, but in presence. The grandeur that once felt suffocating now seemed shallow. The gallery wall was stripped bare. No curated perfection this time. Just empty hooks and sun-bleached wallpaper. I walked the halls slowly, touching the door frames, peeking into rooms like I was saying goodbye to ghosts. In Dad's old dresser, I found a small velvet pouch. Inside, his wedding ring and the necklace I used to tug on as a kid whenever he held me. No one stopped me when I slipped it into my pocket. It wasn't just a house I left, it was every room that ever made me feel invisible. I zipped up my bag and slung it over my shoulder. On my way out, I nearly bumped into Dahlia. She looked nervous, like she'd been waiting. Without a word, she reached into her hoodie and pulled out a folded piece of paper. She handed it to me like it was sacred. I opened it. The drawing. The crayon family tree she'd shown me days ago, only now it was flattened, pressed between two sheets of wax paper to keep it safe. My name still circled in purple, at the very center. "She threw it out," Dahlia said. "But I saved it." "Alethea?" I asked. Dahlia nodded. "But you're still my family, even if they don't act like it." I knelt down. "Sometimes, the smallest voice says the loudest truth." She smiled. "That's what my teacher says too." I hugged her gently, tucking the drawing into my folder with the will, the evidence, the audio file. Proof that I existed. Outside, Aurelia sat in her usual spot on the porch swing, nursing a cup of coffee like it held all the answers she never gave. We didn't speak at first, just watched a squirrel dart across the yard and disappear up the tree that used to be Dad's pride and joy. "I don't know if I made the right choices," she said finally. Her voice wasn't defensive, just hollow. I stood there for a moment, then replied, That's not my burden to carry anymore. She looked away, and I walked down the steps without waiting for more. That afternoon, I drove into town and found the old shelter where Dad and I once volunteered, long before the fractures, before the pretending. I met with the director, handed her a check, and asked for no recognition, no ceremony, just a plaque. I gave them the words, "In memory of the man who finally spoke up, and the daughter who listened." On the way back to the motel, my phone buzzed. Text from Ivana. "You're officially listed as co-owner now." It's done. I pulled over on the side of a gravel road, took a breath, and looked out over the field of wildflowers stretching across the old workshop land. No cameras, no posts, no witnesses, just peace. Back at the property, I stood where Dad and I once built a workbench from salvaged wood. The land was quiet, but it no longer felt abandoned. It felt mine. I reached into my bag, pulled out a blank notebook, and opened to the first page. With a pen, I wrote, Chapter 1, The Life I Chose. As I closed the cover, a soft car horn echoed from down the road. I turned, saw a familiar vehicle idling with the door open, someone I'd asked to pick me up, not take me back. I looked at the house once more. I used to chase love like it was owed to me. Now I build peace like it's mine to keep. I walked into the courthouse with nothing to prove and everything to confirm. This time, I didn't clutch papers like armor, I carried them like facts. I wasn't pacing, wasn't trembling. I was ready. Alethea and Calliope sat at the far side of the courtroom, their posture sharp, but their eyes hollow. Gone were the curated smiles and carefully chosen statements. Now, it was their lawyers who did the talking, fidgeting, flipping through binders that couldn't outmatch truth. The judge reviewed everything. The notarized will, the voice recording, the forged contract that stripped my name from the house, the thumb drive with my writing in Calliope's keynote, the check trail that no one had bothered to acknowledge, until now. When he finally looked up, he didn't pause. This court finds in favor of Alazne Torres, full inheritance of the workshop land, financial compensation for legal damages. The public record will be amended to reflect instances of verified fraud. He leaned forward, voice clear and precise. Truth, when documented, leaves no room for dismissal. I didn't smile, I just nodded. Outside the courtroom, news moved faster than wind across the parking lot. Alethea's name was scrubbed from marketing campaigns overnight. Her Family First brand deleted tweets, pulled press kits, and issued a vague statement. We are reevaluating partnerships in light of recent revelations. Calliope's university board didn't take long either. Tenure suspended. Official review launched. The department chair, who once sent me a generic condolence card, now emailed Ivana for a sworn statement. The headlines hit harder than I expected. Sisters caught in inheritance fraud scandal. One daughter erased. One daughter remembered. But I gave no interviews, no rebuttals, just one line, released through Ivana's office. Let the record speak. I didn't want revenge. I wanted reality to be louder than image. 2 days later, I walked into the Attorney General's office with one last envelope, a quiet conclusion to a battle that never should have started. Inside, my father's signed letter, the full audio, printouts of every payment I'd made to keep the lights on in a home that never claimed me. The clerk asked, "Are you submitting this for review?" I smiled gently. "No, this isn't a submission, it's a conclusion." I walked out without looking back. They used paperwork to bury me. I used paperwork to resurrect the truth. The workshop land looked exactly how I remembered it, overgrown, scattered with forgotten tools, but still standing. Mine now. I set my bag down and pulled out gloves, hedge clippers, and a rake. Clearing brush wasn't glamorous, but it was honest work. It grounded me. Later that afternoon, Dahlia arrived with her mother trailing behind. Calliope didn't say anything. She just stood by the car, arms crossed, eyes heavy. Dahlia ran up, ponytail bouncing. "Can I help build something?" she asked. I handed her a pair of gloves and said, "Let's start with space." Legacy isn't what you leave behind. It's what someone else is inspired to build next. That evening, I hung a sign on the front gate. Just a small piece of reclaimed wood with 3 words carved into it by hand. The Root House. And beneath it, a smaller phrase, built on truth. I turned off my phone for the first time in weeks, walked into the wind, felt it tug at my sleeves like Dad used to tug my coat when I was little, guiding me towards something better. I breathed deep. They buried my name, erased my photos, tore apart my roots, but I didn't bloom for them. I bloomed despite them. Some truths don't need to scream, they just need to outlast the noise.